Phrases and clauses. What's the difference between a phrase and a clause? They're both sentence parts. Sentences are just groups of words made up of phrases or clauses. So what's the difference? The difference is a clause has a subject and a verb. A phrase does not. In the clause, because I care, there's a subject, I, and a verb, care. It's not a complete sentence because you're still left wondering, left wanting information because I care what. But it has a subject and it has a verb, and that's what makes it a clause. The phrase, however, with your friends, there's no verb. With your friends, what? Did you eat? Work? We don't know. So that's what makes it a phrase. There are two kinds of clauses: independent clauses and dependent clauses. I ate dinner would be an independent clause. Before I ate dinner would be a dependent clause. Here's why. I ate dinner, it's called an independent clause because it can stand as a sentence independently. But if you add the word before on the beginning, now before I ate dinner, that's a clause. It has a subject and a verb, I ate. But we call this type dependent because it can't stand alone as a complete thought, as a sentence. And it's all because of that word before at the beginning. If I just tell you I ate dinner, you're happy. Okay, I just gave you a complete thought. But if I say, before I ate dinner, I haven't given you a complete thought because now you're left wondering, you're waiting for more information. Before you ate dinner, what? You went running, you set the table, you want more information. So that's the difference. This sentence says, James could go to the ball game if you give him a ride. I'm going to separate it into clauses. Okay, James can go to the ball game, that's one clause. If you give him a ride, that's another clause. James can go to the ball game is an independent clause because I could just stop right there and erase all the rest and we'd have a complete thought. James can go to the ball game. Independent clause. The second clause, however, if you give him a ride, that's a dependent clause because it's not a complete thought. It has a subject, you, it has a verb, give. So it's a clause, not a phrase. But because of the word if, it's now dependent upon the rest of the sentence or the other independent clause. If I just said, you give him a ride, that could be an imperative sentence. And that could be a complete thought. But because of that word if, it's now a dependent clause. So, what is an adverb clause then? Well, an adverb clause is a dependent clause. It's always going to be a dependent clause, not an independent one. Because think about it, to be an adverb clause, it has to be answering a question about something. So adverb clauses are dependent clauses that modify verbs, adjectives, or adverbs. And it has to answer the questions that adverbs answer. Where, when, how, why, to what extent, or under what condition. So let's look at our sentence on the board here again. The second clause, if you give him a ride, that is an adverb clause. It answers an adverb question about a word in the independent clause. It's telling us under what condition James can go. And under what condition is one of our adverb questions. And to be an adverb clause, it has to modify or answer a question about a verb, an adjective, or an adverb. It's answering a question about the verb phrase can go. So if it's modifying a word adverbs modify and it's answering a question adverbs modify, then the whole clause is an adverb clause. Now see the word if? Adverb clauses have these words at the beginning of them because remember, they're dependent clauses. If they're dependent, they have to be dependent on an independent clause. They have to be attached to a main sentence, if you will, in order to answer a question about some word in the main sentence. So we know they're always going to be dependent clauses. Well, dependent clauses usually have a word at the beginning, the one that messes them up and makes them not a complete thought. And the word at the beginning of an adverb clause is called a subordinating conjunction. Remember when we studied adjective clauses and we said adjective clauses were introduced by words called relatives, like who, whom, which, that, and whose? That fear thee, or whose hands shape each tomorrow, or in the last sentence, the black pup is the one. The word that is the relative there, and it's missing. It's an elliptical relative because it's not stated in the sentence. That I chose to keep. Those relatives were the words at the beginning of adjective clauses that began the clause. Well, in adverb clauses, they're not called relatives. They're called subordinating conjunctions. And they are this list of words here on your page in the book using adverb clauses. They give us a very big list under point number 5. Point number 5 says adverb clauses are introduced by subordinating conjunctions. After, although, as if, as much as. And notice how some of these are more than one word. As long as. Those 3 words would be one subordinating conjunction. As soon as, because, before, if, in order that, lest, since. I won't read the whole thing for the sake of time, but these begin adverb clauses. They're called subordinating conjunctions because another word for a dependent clause is a subordinating clause. Think about like a commander in the army or something. His subordinates, the people that are under him, they have to answer to him, right? So think about the dependent clause as it doesn't have the authority on its own. It has to answer to the dependent clause. So I think of it that way. Subordinating conjunctions. So let's look at these adverb clauses, the sample ones they gave us right here. The first one says, we love him because he first loved us. This sentence is made of 2 clauses, an independent and a dependent. We love him. That's an independent clause. That could be a sentence by itself. Because he first loved us, that's a dependent clause. It's a clause because it has its own subject and verb. He loved, but it's dependent because of that word because, that subordinating conjunction at the beginning. The second sentence, before we eat breakfast, Dad reads a verse from the Bible, is made of 2 clauses. And all sentences are either made of, groups of clauses or phrases, except maybe an interjection at the beginning of a sentence like wow or yay, those one-word interjections. Everything other than that is either part of a clause or a phrase, because that's what sentences are. They're groups of words, clauses, and phrases. So the first part, before we eat breakfast, that's a dependent clause. The second part, Dad reads a verse from the Bible, that's an independent clause. My dependent clause is an adverb clause. It's a clause because it has a subject and verb, we eat. It's dependent because of the word before, and it's adverb because it answers the question when about the verb reads. In the third sentence, Leah knows the song better than I. The first part, Leah knows the song, or Leah knows the song better. Those could both be independent clauses. But than I is really missing the rest of its thought. The rest of its thought is then I know it, or then I know the song. And if we had the rest of the thought, we would have a subject and a verb. So therefore we would have a clause. And than is our subordinating conjunction. So than I know it is a dependent clause. And when we have dependent clauses where part of the thought is missing, those are called elliptical clauses. And if we look at point number 6 on the page from our book, it says, essential parts of an adverb clause may be properly omitted if no misunderstanding will occur. Such a clause is called an elliptical clause. He can run faster than I. which is implying he can run faster than I can run. With that in mind, let's do the first couple numbers of exercise A together. Exercise A says, underline each verb 2 times and each subject 1 time. Circle each subordinating conjunction. Put parentheses around each dependent clause. Okay, we can do this. I divided sentence number 1 into 2 separate clauses. Though an host should encamp against me, and my heart shall not fear. The first one is dependent because of that word though. Though is the subordinating conjunction. And my heart shall not fear, that is an independent clause. The subject and verb of my dependent clause is host should encamp. Always remember to keep helping verbs with main verbs. And the subject and verb of my independent clause is heart shall fear. Don't forget, do not include not in your verb phrases. Not is an adverb that tells to what extent the heart should fear, and it is not included in verb phrases. Sentence number 2, blessed be the Lord. That's an independent clause. The dependent clause is, because he hath heard the voice of my supplications. He is the subject, hath heard is the verb phrase, and because is the subordinating conjunction that starts that adverb phrase. Now let's skip down to exercise B and do the first 2 of those together. This one wants us to circle the subordinating conjunctions, put parentheses around each adverb clause. Draw an arrow to the word the clause modifies. So now we have to decide if the clause is an adverb clause or not. Number 1, Satan trembles when Christians pray. I've determined that when Christians pray is the clause here, and when is the subordinating conjunction. And I've decided that this whole clause is an adverb because it answers the question when about the verb trembles. You don't have to write when off to the side like I did. I just wrote it so you could see which adverb question the clause is answering. And go back and check your list of questions adverbs answer, and we see the word when there in the list. When is a question that adverbs answer, and it answers them about verbs, adjectives, or adverbs. And in our sentence, trembles is for an adverb clause, I'm looking for dependent ones. So as we forgive our debtors is dependent. And I've circled as the subordinating conjunction. Remember, the subordinating conjunction is going to be the first word of the clause, or the first several words if it's one of those 3-word ones like such as or inasmuch, whatever they were. Anyway, the whole phrase is answering a question about the verb forgive. And it's answering the question, under what condition should someone forgive? As we forgive our debtors. That's what condition. And exercise C wants us to find 12 adverb clauses in the paragraph. Circle the subordinating conjunction and draw a line under the adverb clause. That would look like this. The very first sentence of the paragraph is an adverb clause. Although readers of the Bible are well acquainted with Abraham and Jacob, it has a subject and verb. Readers are acquainted. But it starts with that word although. That makes the whole thing a clause, a dependent clause. And exercise D wants us to combine each pair of sentences into one sentence by using an adverb clause. The first one is done for you. He broke the law, he had to be punished. Since he broke the law, he had to be punished. So we need to choose a subordinating conjunction from the list. For number 2, Adam loved his son dearly. He chose to obey God. We go to the list, number 5, and we pick one. How about because? Because is in the list. Because Abraham loved his son dearly, he chose to obey God. Or maybe that's not such a good one, considering the story we're talking about. Maybe even though Abraham loved his son dearly, he chose to obey God. Or although Abraham loved his son dearly, he chose to obey God. That's all for today. Tomorrow we will learn how to diagram them. Ooh, exciting. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.